The biggest name in women's basketball history didn't go to the Olympics. Let that land for a second. Caitlin Clark, the player who shattered every NCAA scoring record ever set, sold out every arena she entered, and dragged WNBA ratings to levels nobody had witnessed in 30 years, sat home while Team USA competed in Paris, and the program's official explanation: she just wasn't ready. That answer has never sat right. Not with fans who watched her play every game, not with analysts who track the actual numbers, and critically, not with respected, credentialed figures inside the sport itself. What we know about what happened during Team USA's selection process and what insiders have been quietly saying ever since suggests a far more complicated picture than the simple "she wasn't ready" line that was handed to the public. If you've been following this story and feeling like something fundamental doesn't add up, hit that like button right now, because this investigation is exactly what you've been waiting for. The deeper you go on this, the more it stops looking like a basketball decision and starts looking like a power play. And today we're connecting every dot. Let's start with the setup. Caitlin Clark arrived at USA Basketball's training camp in April 2024 as a 22-year-old who had just ended her college career as the all-time leading scorer in NCAA history, men's or women's, no asterisk. The media presence around her was unlike anything women's basketball had ever produced. Broadcast deals shifted, ticket markets moved, merchandise flew off shelves. A generation of new fans arrived in the sport almost overnight, and most of them came specifically to see Clark. Inside that camp, sources describe an atmosphere that was never quite designed for what Clark actually represented. Team USA's culture is built on seniority, continuity, and a veteran-led structure that goes back decades. Those values built a dynasty. That's not a debate. But they also created a hierarchy that doesn't easily absorb a player whose cultural footprint already eclipsed the entire program's previous visibility before she ever touched an NBA-sized court. Multiple insiders who were around the facility during that camp period describe a climate that went beyond competitive intensity. Clark was being scrutinized differently, not harder in a productive way. Differently, in a way that felt designed to test whether she'd push back. Reports that circulated through professional circles after the roster was announced describe a program where the environment was cold in ways that went beyond normal veteran-rookie dynamics. Sources suggest she found herself navigating a structure where her questions were unwelcome and her presence was treated as an intrusion rather than an asset. Head coach Cheryl Reeve ultimately made the call. Reeve is a legitimate, accomplished coach. Her basketball credentials are real, and her dynasty record speaks for itself. But every selection process happens inside a culture, and cultures have politics. They have loyalties. They have preferences that don't always appear in the official reasoning, and they have blind spots that even the most qualified decision-makers can miss. What we know for certain, Clark didn't make the roster. What sources close to the program have suggested since, the outcome felt settled earlier than the public evaluation implied. What the public reaction immediately confirmed, a significant number of people who understand women's basketball professionally, not just fans reacting emotionally, believed something had gone wrong in the process. Nancy Lieberman didn't hold back, a Hall of Famer, a woman who has spent her life inside this sport at the highest level. She stepped in front of cameras and made it plain. The process raised questions that deserved real, direct answers. When someone with that credibility pushes back publicly, that isn't noise. That is a signal from inside the institution that something wasn't right. And there's a second layer here that involves a dynamic many of you have already been tracking. The documented tension between Clark and certain established players in the women's basketball ecosystem, a tension that has roots going back to the NCAA, created a subtext inside that camp that sources say nobody was actively managing. Two distinct eras of women's basketball colliding in the same facility, with a coaching staff that hadn't developed a framework for handling that kind of historical friction. That's the setup. Now let's talk about what the exclusion actually cost Team USA, because this story doesn't end with a gold medal in Paris. It's just getting started. Before we go deeper, what's your honest read on this? Do you think Caitlin Clark was genuinely evaluated on her basketball merits alone, or do you think the outcome was shaped before the evaluation actually began? Drop your theory in the comments right now. This community has been ahead of this story for months, and your analysis matters. Here's where the math becomes uncomfortable for Team USA. While they were winning gold in Paris, Caitlin Clark was in the middle of the most extraordinary rookie season in WNBA history. The Indiana Fever averaged attendance figures that hadn't been seen in the league in years. Road games sold out weeks in advance. National broadcast partners upgraded their coverage of Clark games on the fly because the ratings demanded it. The viewership numbers were record-setting, consistently, every week, not as outliers. Those two realities cannot coexist without raising a serious question. The player Team USA deemed not quite ready enough for the Olympics simultaneously demonstrated she was the most commercially transformative athlete in the entire history of women's basketball. Either the selection process was evaluating something other than Clark's overall value to the sport, or the program made a calculation that will define how USA basketball is discussed for the next decade. There is no version of this story where both things are true and the process was clean. Real quick, if this kind of deep dive investigation is the reason you keep coming back to this channel, consider joining as a member. Your support is literally what keeps us going this deep on stories that matter. Hit that join button below and help us keep the lights on for this work. What multiple sources inside professional women's basketball have indicated since the Paris Games wrapped is that the Clark exclusion wasn't purely technical. It wasn't just a question of defensive scheme fit, or where she was in her development arc, or how a young player handles the adjustment to international speed. The accounts that have circulated through the sport's professional circles point toward something that looks less like selection criteria and more like institutional self-preservation. Reading between the lines of everything that's come out since, a program built on a specific identity controlled by a specific generation, and organized around a specific set of loyalties, suddenly confronted by a player who represented a different future entirely. Louder, younger, commercially dominant in a way that didn't just shift the spotlight, it threatened to fundamentally reorganize the power dynamics of the entire sport. That kind of disruption doesn't always get handled rationally, even by people who are genuinely great at their jobs. The most revealing data point in this entire story isn't what happened before Paris, it's what happened after. The conversation about Clark's absence from the Olympics never stopped. Not during the quarterfinals, not during the gold medal game, not after the ceremony. Every highlight reel from France ran parallel to a persistent public debate about whether the process that left Clark at home was legitimate. That sustained professional-grade doubt, not just fan frustration, but credentialed, inside-the-game skepticism, is itself evidence that this story has unresolved threads, and those threads have direct implications for what comes next. Because 2028 is Los Angeles, home soil, the largest possible Olympic stage for American athletes in a generation. And between now and then, the question of who actually controls Team USA's identity, the legacy veterans who built the current dynasty, the coaching infrastructure that runs the program, or the new generation that Clark is leading into a completely different era. That question has to get answered. It cannot be avoided. Clark has been measured professional and focused on her Indiana Fever career in every public appearance since Paris. She hasn't publicly accused anyone of anything, but the documented environment around that camp, the credibility of the figures who pushed back publicly, and the stark contrast between her Olympic exclusion and her record-breaking WNBA season all point toward a single, unavoidable conclusion. The official story doesn't fully account for what happened inside that program. Women's basketball is in the middle of a genuine, historic transformation, one that isn't reversible. Clark didn't just grow the sport, she detonated it. And the real story coming out of the 2024 Team USA selection process may be that the institutions which governed women's basketball in the pre-Clark era aren't fully prepared to lead it through what comes next. What happened in April 2024 looks more and more like the first major collision between the old structure and the new reality. The outcome of that collision gets settled in Los Angeles, and Caitlin Clark will be standing at the center of it. If you want to stay ahead of this story, because it is nowhere near finished, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now. The 2028 picture is already being shaped behind closed doors, and this channel will be tracking every development. Next video, we're breaking down the specific forces that will determine whether Caitlin Clark takes the Olympic stage she was denied in Paris, and whether the people who made that call in 2024 are still going to be in position to make it again. You do not want to miss that one.